Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there folks, Colin here and welcome to the Home Building Hub, here with co-host Darren Brennan as always. And today we're going to be giving you an update on the 7-star energy rating requirements that are being implemented in a matter of weeks in some states, Queensland, New South Wales and the ACT, and next year for the balance. And I guess from a builder's standpoint, this topic remains quite confusing and certainly relatively unclear at this stage. So today what we thought we'd do is we get an expert on to help us, navigate that and better explain, better understand. And that expert, his name is Brian Haines, who's the director of a company called Energy Lab. So that is energylab.com.au. And he's really here to help us, but also you, the viewers, listeners, prospective home buyers, I guess better understand what the requirements are, how they're going to change and impact what we know about designs today versus what they're going to look like and what we need to account for moving forward. So before we introduce you, Brian, Darren, a little bit of a fee to listen to the podcast. You want to cover off on that stuff?
Yeah, Cole, absolutely. And thanks for joining us, Brian. We obviously have a fee for the podcast. That is, if you like the podcast, please share it with somebody else. We don't raise any revenue from the podcast, and it's our way of getting it spread as far and wide as we can. So also, if you're enjoying the podcast, leave us a 5-star review. That also does great wonders to assist others being able to find the podcast. We like to have a disclaimer which says, whilst we're all about providing you value, this podcast should not be considered as legal or financial advice. It contains general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your personal situation before making any legal or financial decisions. And I think that somewhat applies to here too. And welcome, Brian, in terms of, there's a fair bit to get to understand with the new 7-star ratings and some of the information we'll talk about today. You can't just go, great, that'll work. And that'll work on my place and we're away. So, and assume that we're going to be there and then come back in 6 months' time and listen to the podcast again and go, these blokes led me down the garden path because that doesn't work on my block. But welcome, Brian. And, mate, we're wrapped to have you on board and really appreciate you reaching out. It must be 2 or 3 months ago, and we've been talking back and forward here and there to sort of work out when, what, how we're going to do this. But we're wrapped to have you on board, mate. So,
thank you. Yeah, it's been a tumultuous time in the industry. Certainly been a lot of things going on. So, if I can help clarify stuff, just let me know.
Absolutely. So we've got Brian out of bed nice and early this morning, kicking off 7:30 on a Saturday morning. So we're just letting him make sure he guzzles down the coffee before we get into too much technicality. But yeah, thanks again, Brian, for joining us. So maybe just to kick off, Brian, do you want to give us a bit about your history and tell us a little bit about Energy Lab and what it is you guys do and what service you provide, just to give people a bit of context?
Yeah, okay. So, all right, it's a long story. So where do you start? All right, so Energy Lab has basically started in 2005. Back then, there weren't a lot of people doing energy efficiency assessments, so it was all brand new to code. And I think I came from a volume building background, marketing basically, and I thought I'd take that into the energy efficiency space. And I believe we were probably the first actual company to do energy efficiency assessments and not just do it as a side project. So say being an architect or a designer and you were just doing energy efficiency assessments on the side, and expanded from there. So from back bedroom of a house to needing staff, needing an office, needing more staff, bigger office, doing more reports. Eventually we ended up doing assessments in the UK, starting an office in Vietnam. At the moment, we're heavily invested in AI and machine learning. So heading down that path to help other energy efficiency assessment companies scale their businesses without needing to take on more staff. official energy raters for the Block TV show on Channel 9. We've been doing that for the last 13 years. We're well into the commercial space as well. So I do a lot of hospitals, police stations, schools, universities, Department of Health and Human Services houses. Our clientele are lots of volume builders, designers, architects. Got literally thousands of clients on the books now, probably completing well over 100 assessments a day at this point in time. So it's certainly grown to be a lot bigger than what we had originally anticipated, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's great. I think one of the things that I guess I noticed doing the homework in preparation for this was the AI. I think that was really cool, and I noticed a couple of commentary or bits and pieces through your website and some of your posts that you're really trying to achieve. I guess being from a builder point of view, I'm looking at you're trying to give people the ability to get assessments back ASAP and utilising technology in order to do that. And I thought that's quite powerful. So it'd be good to learn a bit more about that as we go through the topics today. Darren, do you want to kick off with any questions? Obviously, it's going to be a complex set of topics for people today, and we'll do our best for you guys, the listeners and the viewers. We'll do our best to sort of, bring that down to layman's terms. But we respect there'll be some builders and people in our own industry, Daz, listening to this, and we just want to give a bit of an insight, understanding, and try and give people some of the answers to help them move forward, basically. So
absolutely.
Where do you want to begin, Daz? Yeah.
I was going to just say, just touching on the AI bit too, is one thing I've always found about energy ratings is they're very subjective. So, you can have one energy rater rating a house slightly different to somebody else. And so the AI space, if that becomes really efficient, obviously we'll start to pump out the same result every time, which makes much more sense to me because I'm a bit more black and white. I don't want to hear one guy say one thing, someone else say the other. So, I'm really rapt to hear that you guys are working on that, and I'd love to see where that ends because it does, again, takes away a little bit of the confusion that's created not only for the builder but for the end user in that space. So, you're welcome to touch on that if you want, Brian, or we can skip past that commentary, but I think it's interesting.
No. That's fine. In a perfect world, every energy rater should actually be given the exact same result. Now, if you were using the exact same specification, you were inputting the data in the exact same way, you literally should get the exact same result. So generally, it's just lack of knowledge, maybe lack of experience, lack of not understanding the protocols, the NatHERS protocols, the tech notes, even the instruction manual for the actual energy rating software itself, or just changing specification, one interpretation of what window U and SHGC values between energy rater A and B. I mean, those types of things can lead to different results. Now, as far as the AI goes, yeah, it will produce the same results time after time after time, but it's only as good as the way it's actually programmed. And you're right, it is still sort of subjective because you've got a system that's looking at a PDF floor plan and it's trying to analyze that into a two-dimensional space, let's say. So it doesn't always get it right. I mean, a human does need to sit there and sort it out sometimes, so it's not 100% foolproof. And as you know, each set of plans is going to be different. Now, this thing's been trained on volume builder look-in plans. So if you get something highly complex from an architect, hey, it might not work too well on that. Or if you get something hand drawn on a napkin from
I was going to
some
say
person, like it's not going to be able to do that. But over time, these things, it just needs. It's like feeding the hungry beast. It just needs plan after plan after plan, so it can learn and understand what it needs to do. But you'd be surprised where machine learning is at these days. It does some pretty remarkable things that you'd think it wouldn't be able to do. So who knows where we'll be in the next 12 to 18 months.
I think as a society, we're right at the start of that AI space. There's a lot that's been around for ages, etc. But whether it be, Google Homes, all that sort of stuff. But the new age of where that's heading, and I know even myself in my role, a couple of times this week, I've jumped on and used AI, and it's just brilliant what time saving it can provide. And it's not necessarily delivering exactly what you're after, but gee, it takes out a big chunk of time to get you ahead. And I know Colin introduced me to some of that stuff as well, and I know Cole's all over it. And I think it's just a great place to, where things are evolving. You mentioned NatHERS, and I'm NatHERS. Give us, what does it stand for? A little bit of an intro into that.
Yeah, okay. So that's the National House Energy Rating System. It's the governing body that looks at everything energy assessment wise in Australia, let's say. So they they basically talk to the Australian Building Codes Board and then direct all that information back onto the NatHERS software providers. They write all the protocols. They basically dictate everything that has to be done with regards to energy efficiency assessments in Australia
So
for
they
new homes.
essentially setting the benchmark of what needs to be achieved. Is that pretty much
Well,
what it is?
let's
And
say
then,
setting the guidelines
Mm.
of what needs to happen. Yeah.
yeah, great.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you get a set of plans, often they're stamped with NatHERS on there. So that's just, I guess, acknowledging that it's met that set of guidelines when the plans are issued after they've been rated by the energy rater. I'm assuming, is that right?
Yeah, well, it's regulatory compliance. So unless you meet that criteria, you obviously can't pass those conditions within your building permit. Then obviously build. So, and that NatHERS assessment will just make sure that you pass those specific set of requirements in the National Construction Code. There are multiple pathways of actually doing that, but NatHERS is the most common, and the reason why that is because you can trade off one element of the house for another. So, say for example, you didn't want to spend so much money on windows, you could upgrade insulation, and you can trade off. You can get a better performing house doing the things that you want to do rather than a more prescriptive methodology that's in the National Construction Code itself.
Or essentially what you mean by that is that almost like points are attributed to certain parts of the home, and so windows are attributed a certain number of points to get you up to that star rating, right? And that's sort of how that loosely comes down. I'm just trying to break that down a bit for the layman out there. That'd be an
Okay, I'm
easy
going to
way to
say
put it.
that. I'm going to say, okay, very loosely, yes.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to
Yeah.
hear. So no, great.
But
Yeah.
essentially, what's happening is we currently need to achieve a 6-star rating, and that's moving to a 7-star. So the question around this entire topic is, what do we need to do to homes to bump them up to a 7-star rating? And so it'd be good to start with, Brian. Like, let's walk through what are the 7-star rating requirements, and you can go by sort of pick a state or whatever if they're across the board pretty similar. But just give us a brief explanation. What's it going to take so we understand to get to 7-star?
Okay, so it's all about design now. So we've come pretty much as far as we can with insulation levels. We're pretty much as high as we could go with insulation levels to get to 6 stars. Majority of houses will probably need in some form of double glazing to comply with 6 stars. So when you're trying to go to 7 stars or any star value higher than 6, let's say, it's an exponential scale of complexity. So increase in price, as soon as you start increasing the complexity of that house type, your costs start to go up as well. So, if we've gone to the point where we've exhausted everything that we can do with insulation and glazing, then obviously all that we're now left with is the design itself. So we need to start going back to the drawing board and looking at the way we design houses in Australia. And it's definitely a case of design for climate as well. So some things that will work very well in, say, Queensland will not work well at all in Melbourne. Like it could have a negative effect. And this is what a lot of people are actually not understanding in the industry at the moment, where they're thinking, eaves and al frescoes and light colours and all of those types of things. Yep, they work fantastic in Queensland, but it's actually definitely going to have a negative contribution in Melbourne, parts of South Australia, Tasmania, places like that.
Obviously, with those changes, then um, being design changes more specifically, and some of that, I mean, I guess I'll look at, the guys I work for, we don't double glaze as a standard, so we'll move to double glaze windows. Some of the insulation levels will increase, but as you say, some of that we're having to do already if we've already made a change to the home, etc. And again, climate, different regions, different areas, even within the state. We're in Victoria, so if you're building, Bayside, down around the ocean fronting, different slight requirements to if you're building in Mildura, where it's obviously a lot hotter, a lot drier. So those things change, your requirements needed. But from a design point of view, what would be some of the key design elements that are going to really impact getting that result you're after, being a 7-star? And it's not what you're after; it's what you must comply to come once that kicks off. And obviously varying dates per estate. But
Yeah, okay. So I can tell you what you don't want to do, or
yeah,
at least let's say the things that will make life more difficult for you. So more difficult for the homeowner building the house as far as cost goes, more difficult for the builder, more difficult for the energy assessor. So if we're talking about design items, the shape of the house, that plays a very important role to the energy efficiency assessment. So even though this doesn't sound particularly fantastic, but anything that's a square or a rectangle, a box on box, that is the most efficient shape that you can actually build from an energy efficiency point of view. If you've got a house that's, say, an L shape or an H shape, there's so much more additional external wall to atmosphere that is created in those types of house shapes, that you're just, obviously, with all that extra external wall, you're letting the heat out during the winter and you're letting the cooling out during summer, because you've just got so much extra wall that's facing atmosphere. Things like light courts, things like glazed links, all those architectural things that designers love to put in designs, anything that has additional glass, they're the types of things that are going to cause problems to trying to actually achieve 7 stars moving forward.
I think
Double white. Yep.
just to break that down really simply for our listeners too, Brian, and I use this a lot when I talk to people about energy ratings, that if you have 100 square meter home, that could be a 10 meter by 10 meter home, and that would have 40 linear meters of external walls. But you can have the same home in size, but it could be 2 meters by 50 meters. And now you've got 104 linear meters of external wall boundary for the same area. So, all of a sudden you've got all this extra, like you said, heat getting in or heat getting out through those walls. And you've now got 104 meters of walls versus having 40 meters of walls. So that, box type arrangement clearly works more effectively than long, skinny, or like you said, L shape or U shape or any
Yeah.
of this sort of stuff. So, just trying to make it simple for people to understand how that can be so different. It's exactly that.
Yeah, that's right. I've seen houses that look like donuts. They've just got a big hole punched through the center of them, and obviously, when you've got a U-shaped al fresco, or again that donut shape, obviously those extra external walls are generally going to be filled with some type of glazing. So it's even worse in that respect, because you want a view, or you just want the aesthetics of the house to actually look nice, but introducing glazing into a wall is probably, it looks great, but it's probably the worst thing you want to do from a thermal point of view. So if we look at, say for example, the windows are measured in U values, the wall insulation's measured in R values. There's a direct correlation between a U value and an R value. One is the inverse of the other. So if you can imagine, you have the best window that you can buy on the market at the moment, something that's double glazed, thermally broken, low E, and it has a U value of, say, 1.9. The inverse of that is probably around the same as an uninsulated brick wall. So you can imagine the best window that you can buy on the market is as good as an uninsulated brick wall. So you can imagine how bad a single glazed window is in a house. You may as well not even have a window there. It may as well just be a big hole in the wall. So you can see, windows from an energy efficiency point of view is probably the worst thing that you can do. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do that. It is just going to make it more difficult to achieve those higher star values. And at the moment, let's say you're a volume builder, you're probably sitting somewhere around that 34 to 40% window to floor area ratio. And where you really need to be for optimal performance is around that 23% mark. So anything below that or anything above 23% is going to make it more difficult to achieve higher star ratings. It's not that you can't, it's just going to get more expensive.
So more likely what you're going to see is builders' designs reducing window sizes. So you might see on bedrooms, instead of having a 1.8 by 1.8 window, that might all of a sudden become a 1.8 by 900 window. Would that be a fair sort of?
It's exactly what you're actually going to start seeing. So especially for volume builders, by this time they should have done all of their work. They should have redesigned all of their house plans to achieve better or easier compliance to bring those base prices down. Now, if the client walks into the display home and says, hey, I want to increase a sliding door by 1 meter or 1.5 meters, well, obviously they need to know that it's going to make the energy efficiency assessment poorer, and obviously there'll be a cost associated to that. But at this point in time, yes, the volume builders should have reduced all of their windows on certain orientations. They should have worked out what the worst orientation is. How do you get that to 7 stars? What is the cost to do that? And what is my best, most effective upgrade hierarchy of inclusions to achieve that goal? Set price, it's now in the base price, and away we go. We know we can build that house on any orientation, and we know what that price is going to be from an energy efficiency perspective.
So do you think, so just to, I guess, give some context, currently we got a base price for a floor plan that we can give to a client up front without a block and just say that house, those inclusions, that price. Now, what comes into here, in addition to the windows, is the orientation of the block that house gets put on. So if we're going to go and do a house and land package for a client or up front for a developer and a land estate, it's going to become more complex in terms of, well, will we get that right? So I'd like to learn a little bit more about the orientation component, if that's okay. What in general, is there a way to say, well, here, what's the best orientation? What's the worst? What's the impact? And do you think builders will be able to pre-price all of this, for the most part? Maybe they choose that plan on that orientation is this price, and then on a worst orientation it's that price. Like, how do you, talking with builders you've already spoken to, like, how do you see builders attacking that? So
Yeah, okay. So generally you can say that north-facing glass is the best orientation. We can probably use that as a rule of thumb. As far as trying to work out what the worst orientation is, it's not too difficult. All you need to do is obviously put the floor plan into the software, draw it in the software. You can press a button, it can calculate it on all the 8 main orientations. You can go to more orientations if you like, and it will tell you what's the best and what's the worst. Generally, from a volume builder's perspective, what they would do is they do that 8 orientation calculation. They'd find what is the worst orientation. They would then build that up from whatever it was. Let's say it was 6 stars, round numbers. They'd build that up to 7 stars. They'd work out what that price is, and then that would form the base price. Any deviation from that standardized plan on that worst orientation would generally be an additional cost. Now, that'll work in, say, 95% of cases, but you're also going to have that 5% of cases, say, for example, you're building a single-story house. And we also need to take into a consideration neighbouring obstructions. So fences, and neighbouring houses. So if you have a single story house and you're in Victoria, let's say, and somebody builds a double story on both sides of you, that will negatively impact your energy efficiency assessment. So if we, for example, see that there's on the site plan that there's a double story built or proposed to be built next to that single story house, that needs to be included in the energy report as well. Now, that's not something that a volume builder is generally going to know when a sale is made in a display home. So you can account for the majority of scenarios, but you can't account for everything. And the other factor that also needs to be taken into consideration is, so say a house rates at 6 stars, you rate it in 8 orientations, you find the worst orientation, you can then upgrade that house. You can then re-rate it in the 8 orientations, and the worst orientation will actually change. And the reason why that is because the upgrades that you do within the house changes the thermal dynamics of the house itself. So again, it gets increasingly complex as you move to these higher and higher star ratings. So again, you're always playing with numbers. You can account for a certain percentage of potential issues, but you're never going to be able to account for them all.
Playing with a Rubik's cube and understanding that the bottom side can change at its own peril. It's almost like, if you do it quick enough, you might get it to work.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think one of the biggest challenges in my mind, Brian, has been how do I present to a customer a plan and a base price with confidence? Because we don't want to go back to them in 3 months and say, look, it's actually, you got to pay another $2,000 or $10,000 or even more, because that can ruin their finance situation and have, wreak havoc on a whole range of things, let alone your own brand and reputation. So it's seemingly one step here we've got to take is through education and educating the clients and the buyers of what those possible outcomes can be and what we've done to best address the worst situation, but obviously encouraging and educating them not to be making these changes. Like, I think for us, we do make a lot of structural changes, and that includes windows and the shape of the house all day, every day. That's going to be impacted significantly now, isn't it? And will that require pre-assessments, do you think, before the sale is essentially made or before the contract's prepared?
So if you did enough calculations, let's say, so if you did enough assessments on all your facade options for a particular design, or all the possible structural changes for that particular design, if you did enough calculations, you could essentially put together a matrix of answers or star ratings, and your sales consultants in the display homes would probably have enough information. If somebody walked in and said, hey, I'm choosing this particular design, this particular facade, this particular structural option, and my block of land is facing this direction. I mean, if you wanted, you could go to the point of, hey, I've got a double story on this side, but not this side, and I have at the back, but you'd be doing millions of permutations. But generally you probably could, but it's going to get to that point of, do I actually want to do that many calculations? And it's going to be so time consuming. I'd probably just stick to the worst orientation, get in it to 7 stars, get in the price on that, maybe doing a few structural options and a few facades, and then working out a base price based on that, and then having the caveats in the contract or the caveats in the sales material to say, hey, if you make these specific changes, it will alter the energy efficiency assessment, and there could be additional costs. But you can also get to the point where you can't take client derived changes. If you have a really good selling design, something that you do not want to take off your books, but it is a difficult design as far as trying to get to 7 stars, or let's say a costly design to get to 7 stars, you may have to do something like limit the orientations that it can be built on, or limit the structural changes that can be done, because you could get to a point where to just achieve 7 stars, you've maximized all your insulation, you've maximized the window specification, you've gone as far as you're willing to go as a company. And as soon as that client walks in the door and wants to change something, may just push it over the edge and you just can't do it. You may have to put the brakes on changes completely for particular designs. But again, it's all about doing enough calculations to know where you stand with every design.
I think, Brian, when I first started in the industry, I worked for a company called National Builders Group that's no longer around either. A bit like we're talking about Avonwood when you started, mate. But one thing that they did was on all of their plans, they had preferred orientations. And they said, well, we guarantee this home meets, I'm going to say it was 5-star then, but it might have been 6. It was 5-star. These homes meet 5-star in these orientations, and they don't meet it in the others. So you're going to have extra cost, or we may not be able to get it to rate there. So, they just basically had shaded in different colors, and the brighter the shading meant, the more likely it was going to actually rate. And it might have said facing north, the front door facing north, it's looking good, but the front door facing south, that's not shaded, it's no good. It's just not going to rate in that location. And I know that's a pretty basic way to put it, but I'm sure there'll become a little bit of that as well for builders, where they can control, what's going to work. And then, because we're hoping that at the very coal face that the sales consultant can give pretty accurate, where possible, advice so that the customer's not disappointed. And, I guess every builder will work their way through that and how they think it's going to be best presented on their behalf. And, I guess it's a matter of, as a consumer, just asking questions around that. Is this home going to comply in this orientation? If you're unsure, how do I find out? What sort of time frame? Is there a cost to find out if it's going to comply? And sort of roll forward from there. And again, I would assume some builders may choose to get the worst orientation and get the home rated up. And I think that you'll see most builders will back down that path, but some may go the other way and just say, no, bugger it. We'll just pick some of the orientations and make it rate. It's going to keep our house a bit cheaper. We don't have to, upgrade as much insulation or as many windows, and say, well, in these other orientations, good luck, and we'll just charge you more later. But they'll win the customer's deposit and march them down a path from a price point of view. Not that I'm certainly suggesting that's a good idea by any stretch, but I can just
You can
imagine
see the look on my face now, can't you?
Yeah. And you know it's going to happen too, and so does Colin. we all do.
All right, so I've seen them take, obviously the majority take worst case scenario. I've
Yep.
seen the best case orientation, and I've seen mid-range orientations taken into consideration. From a customer's point of view, walking into a display home, that is fraught with danger. Because again, going back to the design complexity versus cost versus star graph, being an exponential increase in costs, it could blow out wildly. And I really mean wildly. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars from best to worst orientation, because we're hitting that pointy end of the spear now. And when it is difficult to comply, it is really difficult to comply, and you can throw everything in the kitchen sink at it and still not get it to comply. So those costs are just going to go up and up and up. So all these calculations generally are going to have to be done beforehand. Otherwise, you are going to get some very unhappy clients at contract stage. Trust me.
One thing we didn't touch on, we talk about 7-star, but love to just a really 30-second, 1-minute overview of what are we trying to achieve with this 7-star. Like, is it comfort in the home, environmental impact? Give us your spin on that, because I think that's pretty important too, as to why have we moved the boundaries from 6 to 7.
Okay, so basically it's to save on mechanical heating and cooling. So the more tight that thermal fabric can get, the more efficient that thermal fabric can get, the less reliance we have on mechanical heating and cooling, obviously to reduce carbon emissions, reduce cost. From my perspective, I think there was other ways we could have achieved things that were going to be more beneficial for the environment and less costly on construction. I mean, we could have gone to net zero carbon just as easily, and factored in solar panels on the house roofs to achieve net zero. Obviously, we sort of delve into that with whole of home, which we can chat about as well. But there are definitely better metrics that we could have done to achieve, I think, more worthwhile goals. But I think we're just chasing numbers at this point in time.
So
Going from
essentially, what you're saying though is we're trying to stop people turning on their heater as much and stop turning on their cooling as much, so that one, it reduces cost, two, it reduces the impact on the environment because they're drawing an energy source, generally speaking, that's going to be coal fired, gas, whatever it's going to be, that's going to be driving your electricity or gas through your home. The other bit is obviously it's a comfort factor. So, obviously, and am I right in saying, I know I'm going to pinch Rory's, we had Rory Costello record with us, and he was saying 18 to 23 degrees. Is that the band? I always thought it was 18 to 26, but he said 18 to 23, and he seems more educated than me, so I'm going with his. But, is there a band of temperature they're trying to maintain within the home?
Yeah, within NatHERS software itself, there is a temperature range that it calculates to. So yeah, you can say that that's the benchmark temperature. But again, there's a benchmark heating and cooling system that's in the software as well. Now, let's say you got to 7 stars. Well, then you would not need heat. Well, theoretically, you wouldn't need heating and cooling at all. So that is the goal. The higher and higher you go with the star ratings, the less reliance on that heating and cooling, and your thermal fabric of the house itself is going to be the thing that's acting to keep you warm in winter and cooler in summer.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess you talk about the cost component. I know you've done a fair bit of homework on that. Not something that we will keep anyone accountable for, but in general, can we get an idea of a single and a double story? What to go from a 6-star to a 7-star? Is there a bit of a range you could provide based on the homework you've done of what those increases will be for a worst case orientation?
It's so dependent on the design. Say, for example, you put a 6-star house through the whole of home calculator, you put a 7-star house through the whole of home calculator, you do nothing with regards to, more energy efficient appliances or whatever. You're really just testing what is the difference between the thermal fabric of the shell of the house at 6 to 7 stars. You're generally probably going to get $100 a year difference. So if you extrapolate that out on how much it's going to cost additionally to go from 6 to 7 stars, you can probably work out those calculations yourself and see how long that return on investment takes to get back.
Seems a long time. I sort of more meant the base price increase that clients can expect. So is this a $10,000 exercise or a 20 or a 30 or a 40, just roughly on a volume builder's standard plan?
Okay, from when you take into consideration 6 to 7 stars, but also whole of home,
yeah,
it's probably gonna end up somewhere from 8 to 13% increase in house price.
Yeah, so if you said a $300,000 home, we're talking 24 to 35 grand, something like that. Look, it's certainly not cheap, is it, to make the change? But I guess with the whole of home approach, hopefully you see some significant savings in terms of the cost to run your home, but it's still going to take a fair time to offset that cost.
Yeah, and when you add the livable housing changes in there as well, NCC 2022 certainly had an impact on the cost of housing moving forwards.
Yeah. So livable housing, for people who don't know, that's essentially the builders are soon needing to change the designs for essentially for, I guess, for you to be able to live in that home and grow older in that home. So there'll be provisions for, I guess, wheelchair access. There'll be a ramp and wider hallways, and there'll be turning circles at the front of toilets, and there'll be what's called a nogging. There are other options, but essentially a place pre-installed for handrails and things in showers or next to toilets and so on. So that the industry will need to build homes accordingly. So those little narrow designs you see available now, they will completely change, because you can't have, I think it's 1.2 wall to wall, things like that you need. So that's one change builders will need to address. going from 6-star to 7-star is obviously now another change they're going to have to address. And I guess maybe one thing to elaborate a bit more, whole of home. Do you want to explain what that is in addition? So there's one component going 6 to 7-star, I guess thermally. You sort of mentioned that, but what's whole of home mean in addition to that?
Yeah, so whole of home are the bolt-on appliances within a house. So the 6 to 7 stars is the construction materials that make up the house, the thermal fabric. But the whole of home are the new calculations that we need to do, say, for example, the efficiency of your cooktop and your oven and your hot water service, any pool equipment that you have, pool heater, pool pump, uh, and then offsetting that with obviously items like solar panels. So you can offset one with the other. So there are calculations or additional calculations that now need to be done to make sure that you have efficient appliances within your house as well. So it's all, again, if you're using NatHERS software to do that, it's based on a societal cost that we need to meet. So based on a benchmark house, which is all identified within the National Construction Code, and as long as you meet the correct requirements, then you will pass as well. So things like obviously getting off gas and promoting solar as being the offset to meet these requirements. And again, it's different in each state. You won't need to do that in New South Wales because they have the BASIX approach. It's similar but not identical. So that's another consideration that needs to happen. Unless you have, say, a highly energy efficient thermal shell in a small house with very efficient appliances, generally you're going to need solar attached to that house as well to meet those whole of home compliance requirements.
Is a big change for the industry, and probably, in my time, the biggest change that we've seen from a compliance point of view, meeting the building code, etc. And, it's going to come at a significant cost. It's certainly, we're pretty happy that in Victoria they've delayed that by a matter of 6 months from its launch date, just to give a bit of time, one, to get it all together, but two, a bit of relief in that pricing. But I guess from a consumer's point of view, they've got that ability, if they're now becoming aware that there's going to be this significant cost associated with doing so, they can jump in earlier and sign up now and get ahead of the game and end up not having to bear that cost, I guess. It's certainly something that we'd be encouraging if the cost is difficult. And we see, obviously, with first home buyers and stuff in the market right now, it's a real battle for them to get into the market. So if that's going to be the tipping point, it's worth certainly having a chat to your builder about signing up earlier, I guess, and getting ahead of that. So yeah, thoughts on that, Cole?
Yeah, from a first home buyer's point of view, I mean, generally they'll be building the smaller houses with the least amount of windows, etc., etc. They're actually the easiest ones to get to comply. So from a cost increase perspective, it's probably those smaller houses that are going to benefit the most. It's the larger houses that are going to have the most issues and the most cost escalations. From the volume builder realm, generally those floor to window area ratios aren't too extreme. So I wouldn't worry too much from a volume builder's perspective. They will always be able to do enough calculations, always be able to get them to comply within the construction materials and methodology that we have available to us at the moment. Obviously, there will be a cost increases proportionally. It's more something that's custom designed, custom builder, an architect. They're the ones that are really going to feel the impact of this, because you simply will not be able to build houses of a certain type in Australia from this moment forward. And that's the problem that I see. That if you have oceanfront property and you want floor to ceiling windows that span the entire front of the house, that's probably not something that we're going to be able to do. And that's where the problems arise.
Do you think there'll be a change in other building materials as well? Like, in terms of, you mentioned earlier, brick, an uninsulated brick wall being about as efficient as the most efficient window. But do you see changes to other materials outside of, most homes are built with brick? Do you see changes in materials that'll increase the ability to get to a higher energy rating?
Not really. And the reason why I say that is because you get to the point of diminishing returns. So you can say insulate, you can have a wall that's 3 meters thick and it's just full of insulation and it's, let's say, R100 in the walls. It's not going to have the benefit of going from, say, an uninsulated wall to a wall with an insulation value of R2.5. It's just that law of diminishing returns. You can keep up in that insulation level and it's just not going to give the impact of what it was. You'll get to the point where you're not even increasing by 0.1 of a star.
So essentially, you could get your roof, fill the whole thing with insulation. You've got this pitched roof, chock-a-block the whole thing with insulation, but it's almost doing the same as what the R4 bats in the roof are doing already. Is that what you're really saying?
That's basically what I'm saying. Yeah, it's
Right.
definitely going to get to the point where it's not doing anything. So then it goes back to the windows and our specification of the windows. We can go to triple glazing. We can import windows from Europe, but then we've got complications with crane lift, because these things get so expensive to move into place, and then you've got the cost of 10 people on site trying to maneuver all these windows into position and fix them in place. So there's additional costs for that as well. But also you're obviously going to hit the point of diminishing returns with window specification. I mean, how far can we go? Can we go to quad glazed windows or something ridiculous like that, where it hits U values below 1? I mean, these things are just ridiculous. So it always goes back to the design. And what I'm thinking is that houses built prior to 2024 will command a premium on the secondhand market because they're built in a different way. It's more aesthetic for what people want. So these are definitely things that are going through my head at this point in time about what the future of construction in Australia is actually going to look like, moving into this realm of 7 stars, or who knows, 8 stars, wherever we're going to end up.
It's interesting. It's going to take such a shift for, as I said sort of a bit earlier, about the education with clientele, not just as builders. They're going to have to understand the new way of homes being built and the new can and cannot sort of haves, because it's seemingly going to restrict some of those cosmetic or aesthetic things we can have today. They won't be available anymore. And it's going to take us as an industry some time to get our heads around that. And I think it'll take the clients out there, prospective home buyers, probably even longer to get that explained in a simple way, shape and form. Is going to be a real challenge, I think, for us. But hopefully the listeners today have learned a fair bit. I know I have, Brian. There's obviously a million different things that we could go on about, but what you've shared today has been really insightful to give us a bit of a grounding and understanding of what's to come. And I think I've taken away this sort of separating this. There's only so far we can take materials of the home, and we're sort of already, with double glazing and insulation, like we're already there. So it's now the design of the home and the shape of that home that's really the impact. So we need to be, as best we can, to price accordingly. I think on the worst orientation, I think that hammered home for me. As we said, Daz, there are going to be people who go in under, which is a shame. But price as best we can for the worst orientation and hope that there's no additional increase for the client, and restricting those structural changes would be interesting. Yeah, definitely a different way of selling the product, buying the product and processing the product is all going to change. Yeah, quite an interesting episode. Yeah. Anything else to add there?
Cole,
Yeah.
I was going to say one thing that, you talk about the houses pre-2024 and those existing homes, and they're marketed as existing homes. I think us as builders might be starting to reference them as second-hand homes too, and that with that comes complications and other headaches. So you're going to end up with a brand new home with warranties and all the rest of it that comes with it. It's going to be very energy efficient. It's going to be a lower cost to run, versus buying a second-hand home that may well have a whole lot of headaches that you're about to inherit. If you want to make changes to that second-hand home, you're then going to have to go through the same process and get that home rated to the same levels, and that may not be achievable also. So walking in and talking to your local builder and signing up with them and building a brand new home, that may well come at a slight more cost. You're going to end up with a really, really great outcome anyway, and they're going to work with that with you, and you're not going to end up with a secondhand house. So see if I might have a few of my real estate friends ringing me after this saying, "Don't say that again."
Yeah, I think I already
They're
missed 4
established. No,
calls.
they're not. They're
Yeah,
secondhand. They're secondhand.
yeah. Anything else to add, Brian, before we wrap it up?
No, that's fine, guys. So I can talk for hours on this subject about various different things. So,
Yeah.
like, if you want to ask me any more questions, just shoot. But yeah, I'm good.
I think one thing, Brian, and we might work with this offline, is maybe we could put together a pretty good little fact sheet with you, just with some, maybe 8 or 10 things that we could put up on our website that would just be some stuff for people to be looking at, real basic stuff for our customers out there that are, and listeners that are, looking around and just a bit confused by it all right now. So maybe we'll work on that offline and see if we can put, like I say, something pretty basic together. It'd be great. And I think it'd really help our listeners moving forward.
Yeah, that's easy done. Already got stuff pre-prepared. So, yep, I can send that through to you immediately.
Amazing, mate.
Yeah, it'd
Good on
be
you.
helpful. That'd be great. Well, thank you again, Brian. Everyone listening, I guess we greatly appreciate your time you've taken to listen to this, and hopefully you've taken away a lot. And as we continue to go through these changes in the industry, if you enjoy what you have watched or listened to, please leave us a 5-star review. If you've got any topic ideas or any questions or any feedback, which we're getting a bit of these days, Darren, which is exciting, just jump on the website homebuildinghub.com.au and click the contact us button and go from there. If you want to learn a bit more about Brian's business, it is energylab.com.au. We'll put that at the bottom of the show notes and we'll go from there. So other than that, guys, thank you for your time again, and we'll see you on the next one. 1, 2